Gilchrist, the BRLSI convener for music, and it's my pleasure to curate talks on aspects of music not normally covered by the institution. While we wait for lockdown to finish and for BRLSI to reopen for normal business, we are putting together some virtual talks. This one is about prog rock in the 1970s and is an interview with John Sandford, a local musician and teacher whose lifelong musical passion has been prog rock. That's not to say that John doesn't have all sorts of other musical instruments, but I think it's fair to say that prog rock is what gets John really going. Is that approximately right, John?
That's spot on, Ian. Yes, absolutely.
Good. So when did you hear your first piece of prog rock music?
I think it was probably 1971. I was round a friend's house who had a massive garden. I was also mad keen on football, and he had a massive garden and goalposts all set up with nets and everything. So he was a good friend to know, but he was a bit nerdy, and I didn't know too much about his musical interests. And we were in the living room, and he just put on a piece of music, and it started off as a fairly standard piece of rock music, nice four square rhythms, and then suddenly the keyboards came in and they were playing completely different rhythms, so it was almost arrhythmic to what was going on, and I was absolutely bowled over by it. And that first piece of music I heard was called Yours Is No Disgrace by a band called Yes, and it is Yes that have been the passion for me ever since.
Okay, well that's a great start. Can you show us your t-shirt, John?
Sure.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
little baby
I think that helps
has been
out.
around.
And the
This has
picture.
been around for many years.
Yeah. Okay. So it's obvious. Yes, have been a particularly important influence on your life. Can you give any reasons for this, other than the fact that as a teenager, I suppose you just responded well to the keyboards of Rick Wakeman?
Yeah, obviously it were keyboards that were the sound that really identified, I think, this particular genre, and we were all aware of sort of the little Moog sounds from the sort of late '60s. You know, bands like the Doors, for example, had that sort of instinctive or distinctive rather piano sound, but it was this new wave of synthesized sounds, organ sounds, big powerful instrument sounds that made this type of music so much more powerful than anything I'd heard before.
Okay.
Yeah, being a keyboard player, obviously the music of Rick Wakeman and before that Tony Kaye were very much an influence on me as a music listener at the time.
Okay. Here's off script, John, a question. What about lyrics? Do lyrics matter very much in the music of Yes? Or are they incidental, would you say?
They are absolutely integral, and this is one of the, again, another reason why I was drawn to the music, because the lyrics often didn't make any sense. They were sort of conflating sort of real world experiences with something so mystical that you couldn't really latch onto straight away. But rather than sort of jettison the idea of, well, is this band worth exploring? Because I don't get it. I thought, no, I'm going to sort of delve a bit deeper and try and find out what is the message behind the lyric, because sometimes it was not very clear at all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's my impression too. Um, Over the years, Yes have produced quite a lot of albums, lots of individual tracks. Have you got any you particularly like to pick up from their whole work?
Yeah, I would always probably say the music of the early '70s was very much the heyday, not just for Yes, but for most of the prog rock bands at the time. So I suppose I've got two main favourites from the early back catalogue. The first one, I suppose, is Yours Is No Disgrace. It was the first one that I heard, and it's just that sort of combination of the thumping, driving, rhythmic patterns that the bass player Chris Squire brought to the band, but also, as I say, the interplay between the standard rhythm patterns and the offbeat organ sounds, and it's just a stunning song, which I believe, in my humble opinion, has really stood the test of time. It's an album now that's approaching 50 years old, and to me it still sounds very, very fresh.
Good.
The other song that I would put in my favourite of all time is one called Awaken, which comes from, I think, 1975. It's one of those, how do you say it, 21-minute version pop songs. So it's you just have to sort of go through it, and it goes through various phases, but there's a section at the end where it just explodes into this, I was going to say a maelstrom, but it's just a big, overwhelming sound of building up of organs and vocals and drum beats, and it's the most powerful thing I've ever heard in my life, and it never fails. And I have to say this as a man of passion. It never fails to bring me to tears. I can't stop myself.
Okay.
It's just one of those powerful moments that takes over your life.
If you were allowed to take one Yes album to the desert island, which one would it be? Just one.
Just one. Oh, I
But
tell you
it's an
what,
album, John, not just a single track. So.
Well, I would probably have to go for a triple album then, wouldn't I? Yes songs.
Yeah, that would be allowed. Yeah.
Because I get more for my money. No, seriously, I would say almost because the quality of each of the tracks on this particular album is so strong. This is going to be a bit of a surprise, actually. I would probably take an album called 90125. This was an album that was drawn up in the late 80s, and it was as a result of the influence of a guitarist called Trevor Rabin, who joined the band for a short period of time while Steve Howe was off things with Asia. This guy, Trevor Rabin, came in and immediately put a stamp of authority on this on the music of Yes, to the extent that it was almost unrecognisable from some of the earlier stuff from the 70s. But the quality of the writing is exceptionally good, and every single song on that album is a blinder. I don't think any particular song it exceeds 6 minutes in length, so for a Yes album that was breaking new ground as well.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned other prog rock bands. So far you've just been talking about Yes. So are there any others you'd like to add to the panoply of great bands in that genre?
Yeah, I would probably say Genesis, again in the heyday, were very, very similar. King Crimson would probably, people would say, was the first band to come up with what is defined as a prog rock album. Again, that's open to some debate what it really means, but something that is inspired really by sort of the mystical world rather than the real world that we live in. And I think that Yes and Genesis in particular were able to achieve that. But other bands that I was listening to at the time, we could say bordering on the edge of prog rock would be bands like Jethro Tull and probably Pink Floyd as well. So those would be other bands that I thoroughly enjoyed listening to.
Okay, it's possible to identify a kind of heyday of prog rock. Have you got any thoughts on what reasons led to its decline in popularity? Just sort of talk us through that stage of the scene.
Yeah, I think with anything that is work that is performed by let's say educated musicians, and I have to choose my words a bit carefully in this politically correct time, but I would say a musician who's actually studied the art, gone to maybe music school or understood things about harmony, melodic patterns, scale patterns, those sort of musical theorists who also happen to be fantastically talented musicians. I think that was what people enjoyed about prog rock, but also it was the antithesis that some people would say as to what music should be about. Music should be able to be enjoyed and played by anybody. So the backlash against prog rock was the fact that it was too grandiose. It was sort of pompous, overblown, and it didn't really appeal to the masses. So there was a vacuum, I think, that was created. Maybe the prog rock bands also lost their way a little bit. They couldn't sustain the creativity that had inspired the earlier albums, and maybe they just lost their way. And the vacuum was filled by bands like, well, somebody like the Sex Pistols. That was completely opposite. Anybody could pick up an instrument. You could make yourself your first hit record within about 2 weeks. And, I have to say, at the time, I was shocked, but I could understand why it happened.
Yeah, okay. You touched briefly on listeners as well as performers. So
Yeah.
have you got any thoughts on the difference between, shall we say, men and women in their response to prog rock?
Oh, God.
Was that a difficult question?
Again, it is a difficult question. It's a hot potato politically, this one. But I have to ask the question, when I go to a Yes concert, and I've been to 35 concerts in my time, why is there no queue for the ladies' toilets? Why are there no ladies, or very few ladies, in the audience? Is it Yes, or is it prog rock in particular? Because I've been to Genesis concerts as well, and the same thing happens. It's not very, very popular with ladies. I just don't know what the politically correct answer is. I could postulate that there's maybe a connection with, if you were talking about classical music, for example, more ladies maybe are drawn to the music of people like Haydn and Mozart, where there is a very delineated melody. It's clearly outlined. People can hum the melody. They tend to be shorter. Whereas blokes, I don't know, do they gravitate more towards Beethoven and Stravinsky? It's one of those things. I have no idea. But what I would say is this: I think it is just that prog rock is nerdy, and I think more blokes are nerdy than girls. And I think before I get myself into hot water about gender differences, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that may be a question for you when we come to do your talk live at Brilsey at some point, hopefully the
Yeah.
autumn. I'm still negotiating on
I,
a
I,
date.
I would, Absolutely. I very much like the audience to have their own views on that as well, so I might just throw that one out there and see what happens.
Well, you could chuck in anything really controversial and see what comes back. Anyway,
Absolutely, yeah.
when we have an opportunity to hear your full proper talk, uh, what additional material will you be able to bring with you to entertain us? For example, will you bring some samples of these songs you've mentioned?
Absolutely. I think a talk on prog rock, I would be sort of having a dereliction of responsibility if I didn't include some of the tracks.
Yeah.
But I won't be playing sort of whole versions of things, apart from one song at the end of my talk, which I think does encapsulate how prog rock sort of develops. I think I want to also make the distinction between prog rock. People think, oh, that's just people playing these long solos, and boring people to death. That is actually not very representative at all of prog rock music. That is more the province of the world of jazz, for example, where you have these sort of long solos. Prog tends to be crafted very much along classical music lines, so almost like a symphony structure. So as one of the things I will be keen to point out with my examples is how it has these classical music influences.
Okay, well, I think you're going to get yourself in more hot water by talking about jazz in that way, but we'll hope to get some jazz enthusiasts along, so they can
Oh, I'm
follow.
not. I'm not saying that. Yeah, I wasn't saying that jazz is not a fantastic art form in itself. It's just that people do associate sort of improvisational skills with jazz more than say with prog rock.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, John. That's all we've got time for right now, but I will be posting this on the Brilsey website or getting it posted And then when we have a date for you to do the proper talk, then we'll be in touch for that. Bye for now.
Lovely. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.